I've always been intrigued with the legends and lore that come out of swampy regions, where the cultures and the land itself take on a world of its own. And guess what? I found something new, at least for me, and I'm shocked that it's one that I've never heard of before. But as it would seem, I'm not the only one. Outside of the swamplands of Louisiana, it doesn't seem to be very well known. It's called the Cajun Boogeyman, and with the monsters and creatures we already know about in the Louisiana swamps, what sets this one apart to carry that title over the others, such as the alligator, the Honey Island swamp monster, or even the cursed and feared rougarou? Stick around and we'll see what all we can find out about the Pere Malfait, a name that translates to Father of the Bad Leaves from legend, or as a more literal translation, Father Wrong Doer. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture, some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. The swamps of Louisiana has no shortage of lore and secrets, and every now and again the legend grows enough that those of us outside the swamplands catch wind of them, growing the tales to larger and larger audiences. But more times than not, the swamps hold on to their secrets, guarding their mysteries from the outside world. The land itself and the cultures of those that call the swamps home have a lore all to themselves, but still, it's lore that reaches back into time, and a lot of the times, across the sea. Much like the rougarou that we've discussed here before, there's another creature that lurks in the darkness of the Louisiana wetlands, one that is rarely talked about outside of the swamps itself, and one that lends its origins to the ancient lands of France. The Pere Malfait is its name, a large humanoid creature, roughly 8 feet tall, described with glowing eyes and with enormous otherworldly strength. Some say the creature is covered in Spanish moss. Others say the creature is the moss, the stringy growth of the swamp itself come alive. The few times the creature has been spotted, it quickly disappears into the growth of the land around it, always leaving a clump of Spanish moss behind on the ground as it flees. The Pere Malfait originated in France, where the stories were told to keep children out of the surrounding woodland, a venerable boogeyman in its own right, so it's only fitting that one of the names it is now known by in Louisiana is the Cajun Boogeyman. For the most part, the creature steers clear of mankind, preferring its own isolation in the dark wetlands. But inevitably, mankind is gonna mankind, and there are times when humans encroach on the Pere Malfait's territory, and it never seems to go too well. Unlike the rougarou, where a victim would be found maimed to death, or a gator, where the victim would be dragged into the depths of the swamp and eaten, or even victims of the Honey Island swamp monster being dismembered in a primeval brute force attack, the Pere Malfait seems to be more consistent and methodical in its attack, the results distinguishing its victims over those of something else. The Pere Malfait's approach is to simply crush its victims, similar to a bear hug, the overpowering strength of the creature suffocating and crushing its victims internally, then simply leaving the body behind, only to be found later, crushed and broken, with the telltale remains of Spanish moss in the clutches of the deceased. As slight of a chance as it would be, not all is lost if you ever encountered the Pere Malfait. There is one reported way that one can be taken down, and one way only: a stake through the heart. Oh, and not just any old stake. It has to be a specific stake, one made from the black gum tree, or what locals call the swamp gum tree. There were only a few reports that I could find. They point out that the legend originated in France, a brief but consistent description of the creature and how it can be killed. Outside of that, there wasn't much that I could put together. But there was one historical account that I stumbled across that set me on this rabbit trail of discovering the creature in the first place: the War of 1812. Even though named the War of 1812, it actually lasted to 1814, a little trade war that erupted between America and the British. But even though the war ended on December 24th, 1814, by the signing of the Treaty of Ghent, much of the fighting continued, since news traveled much slower in those days than it does now. Dispatched British troops on American soil continued fighting, not knowing that the war itself had ended. One of those battles in particular was the British attack on New Orleans on January the 8th, 1815, weeks after the official end of the war. British forces, led by Major Edward Pakenham, had engaged American forces led by General Andrew Jackson, and a barrage of artillery attacks volleyed back and forth from American earthen-worked forts outside of the city's perimeter. The British were forced back, and Major Pakenham waited until he was able to regroup his men with arriving reinforcements before planning a night attack on the city of New Orleans with now 8,000 troops under his command. Major Pakenham had sent out his scouts and was able to determine the best approach for his attack. He would send his men into a surprisingly unfortified area of the city, on the other side of a 600-meter march through the swamps. General Jackson's men, as well as a band of supporting natives, had anticipated this though, and it would appear that the creatures of the swamp saw the attack coming as well. The battle fell into complete chaos and was documented as one of the British most embarrassing and bloody defeats of the war. There were reports from survivors, though, of vicious creatures within those swamps, creatures that appeared to be fighting for the American forces. Maimed troops, barely clinging to life, told tales of massive creatures that would later be determined by those in the know as a rougarou, snatching British troops from the lines and ripping them to shreds. But there were murmurs of something else being involved in the battle. Hulking creatures, comprised of swamp growth itself, lifting men off their feet and squeezing them until their cries grew quiet. As word made its way back to the American forces, one man knew for sure what this creature was. Notorious pirate captain Jean Lafitte was working with the American forces after being bribed into service by General Jackson with the offer of a pardon for smuggling charges. Lafitte led a band of mercenaries covering the swamps and waterways around New Orleans. Lafitte's main purpose was to go into the battle areas after the fact, recover weapons and gear from fallen British, and to dispatch any that were still in the area. But after recognizing the descriptions of the rougarou and the Pere Malfait, he nor any of his men would have anything to do with the swamp until daybreak. Believe what you will about the stories coming out of the battle, but remember, war was different in those days. Soldiers were more honorable then, and even losing forces were allowed back in to recover their dead. Wars of that time have what we call missing in action at surprisingly low numbers compared to modern conflicts. In fact, historians of the War of 1812 list those as missing in action at just 695 soldiers. When you take into consideration the involvement of the Rougarou and the Pere Malfait in the Battle of New Orleans, it can't be ignored that out of the 695 reported missing through the 3-year conflict, 484 of those was from the single battle in the swamp alone. It would appear that the swamp protected itself. Reports never point to the idea, and it's hard for me to imagine that the Rougarou and the Pere Malfait ever worked together against the forces invading the solitude of the swamps. As far as the Rougarou goes, I would imagine any soldier that crossed their path were simply a wrong place, wrong time scenario. And if there were more than one Rougarou in the vicinity, perhaps they were lured in by the scent of the bloodshed from the ongoing battle. But what about the Pere Malfait? What exactly is this mythical creature? Unlike the Rougarou that it shares its home with, the Pere Malfait is not some cursed man turned creature by some sort of magic, or the hybrid offspring of an alligator and circus escaped chimpanzee as the Honey Island swamp monster is said to be. No, the Pere Malfait seems to be its own being. But what that being is, no one seems to be quite sure. As a matter of fact, I've been able to find very little myself. From what little information I have been able to gather, the Pere Malfait is simply the Pere Malfait. So it leaves me to speculate, but with enough background knowledge of similar folk beliefs from other cultures, I have my own ideas and opinions of what the Pere Malfait may be. My gut instinct is to label the creature as an elemental, a physical manifestation of the spirit of the swamp made flesh, a protector and guardian of its own mother, the swamp itself. It's said that the Pere Malfait appears and disappears at will, its own natural makeup blending in perfectly with its own surroundings. But perhaps it's more supernatural than that. If it is, in fact, an elemental, then it manifests out of the land itself, rising from the muck and vegetation when it is needed, taking hold of intruders until they are no more, then simply being absorbed back into the swamp from which it rose, leaving behind only the disturbed moss and growth that had briefly been its physical form. If that's the case, the Pere Malfait is much older than any creature it shares the swamps with. It could be a primordial essence of the swamp itself, rising into physical form when it feels the environment itself is threatened. Not a monster, and not a curse, but the land itself, the representation of a world completely separate from the land that surrounds it. An environment that refuses to be tamed, a land that changes its maze of pathways with the rise of every tide, a land that still breeds remnants of prehistoric beasts, a land that refuses evolution and flat out rejects modernity. If the Pere Malfait is not a monster, then, at least for the intrusion of mankind, it's something much worse.